Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Page of Swords podcast. This is episode 47 with Olivia Gravengaard. Thank you so much for coming on. You are an IFBB figure pro, and we haven't quite done a pro show yet, but you've been in a awesome off season that I've been following along with. So let's just start off with your fitness journey. So you started compete. I'm looking at the NPC website. So you started in like August, your first competition.
Yeah, I did a show back in 2017 just to try it out.
Okay.
I don't count it really because I definitely wasn't stage lean. I was just wanting to feel it out, see if I liked it, and I didn't really know what all it took to be a actual competitor. But that's where I got my feet wet a little bit with it, and then decided to come back, in 2020 to compete in August.
Okay. Perfect. So that first show experience, well, what show was it that you did?
Honestly, I don't even remember what it was called. They don't even have it anymore. It was in Jackson, Mississippi. It was really small. But it was I don't even know why I did one that far away from my home, but I just saw a date and went for it. It was just, I didn't know what to expect. And I think it was a good environment to just try it at not too big of a show. And I definitely was challenged by the fact that I wasn't big enough, I wasn't lean enough, and there was definitely a healthy level of competition at the show between the girls backstage. But I had one competitor just kind of see that I looked like a fish out of water, and she was like, come sit with me, I'll talk to you about how all this works, and she just helped me through the show. And I think without her having done that, I'm not sure if I would have ever competed again.
Isn't that awesome? The people that you meet backstage and the friendships you make, because that's one of the best parts.
Yeah, and I think there's this misconception that girls are going to be really catty. And, you have that to a degree, but I've been more surprised by just how much camaraderie there is in this sport.
Yes, definitely. And I know I've heard, I haven't done a pro show yet either, but I've heard the pro show backstage is just so smooth and it's just so enjoyable because, we've been looking up to the figure pros and we have idols and stuff. And I'm sure you will be a little starstruck the first time. I mean, would you agree?
Oh, yeah. It'll be interesting to see people I've been following forever. Oh, maybe one day I'll meet them. And now it's wow, now I get to stand up here next to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So you did that first show and it was figure, correct? That you
Mm-hmm.
did? Okay. And so you brought up that you weren't lean enough, and I feel like we've all been there with that first show. You're not lean enough, but I'm sure you were excited to do the show, right? And even though, did you have any of those kind of doubts at the time?
No, not really. I didn't really know who to compare to at that time, which probably was a good thing because I just got to focus on my process more than anything. And then I really knew once I got to the show, okay, I'm not quite where I need to be.
Yeah, I always tell girls you just got to go and try and show up, have fun with it, because I think that experience that you get is what's going to carry you forward. Because, I mean, hey, someone can say you're not going to be lean enough, but what if you show up and nobody else was either? So,
Yeah. And at a local show, you really never know. So it was just good to kind of get that gauge for, okay, here's the spectrum. And now I know the standard that I want to reach. And it has nothing to do with how these other people showed up at the show, whether or not someone's going to show up or not. Because I think sometimes people bank on that. Oh, well, if no one shows up, I can kind of skate by. But it's more okay, this is the actual standard that I have for myself now. So when I come back, I'm going to be serious about this.
yeah. And did you work with a coach or anything?
Yeah, I worked with William Grazione at the time.
I was going to say, did you do any sort of carb up process? Do you remember for your first show, or was it just?
Not really, no. I don't really remember a lot of the process, but I don't remember much changing at peak week at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I think for a first show, it's probably better to just let the competitor just keep doing what they're doing. Well, that's for any case, but I'm sure most competitors get backstage and they see other people doing stuff that would be why don't I do that? listen to your coach, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a big point, is like peak week isn't magic, and it's like if you're expecting like massive carb ups and stuff, like you're either have had to have worked with this coach before and know that your body needs that, or you're so lean and flat that you're just having to play this catch up game. Ideally, you're not changing that much going into peak week.
No, and digestion is everything. I don't think some people think about some of the foods that I've seen other people eat, and I'm just like looking at it like that would probably bloat me. I'm good with like the rice cakes are just something that just digest well, right, for some people. And then I don't know. I don't know if I'd be wanting to slam like gummy bears or anything that's like too sugary,
Yeah.
right? So then you took a little bit of time off then, right? 2017 to 2020 to kind
Mhm.
of what were you doing? Building muscle, I would assume.
Yeah, I worked with a couple of different coaches during that time, and just tried to build muscle. I tried to go through a cutting phase and it just didn't go super well. And I just started to kind of lose steam for the sport. Like I was always into this because I love the lifting, and now it's like I don't ever feel like I can get my body where I want it to be. So then I just took some time to just focus on, all right, let me really focus on training, digging into that, getting form in a good spot. And then I kind of ran my own bulk. It was a little bit of a dirty bulk, but it was such a valuable time to just learn about my body, like how much food it can actually handle, how much food it doesn't necessarily need, and how much training can improve if you're actually feeding your body.
That is the tricky part, right? How much do you feed yourself into a bulk, Because I mean, I've always had a coach even in my off season, so I don't put any of the guesswork into that. But that's great that you kind of took that responsibility to really learn a lot about yourself and then figure that out because oh gosh, like I'd be so worried, but like you said, you kind of figured it out.
Yeah, it was definitely haphazard a little bit. I had like a strategy for increasing macros,
Mhm.
and it was just like percentages. Like I would just increase. If I didn't gain a pound this week, I would go to this set of macros. So it was just like every week I had it planned out where if I didn't hit it, I would go to this. So I was gaining at a pretty rapid rate.
Mhm.
But I think just holding that higher weight for a long time really helps in just accruing more muscle than I had in the past.
Yeah, I that's the thing about off season. Like I think even in your post that you recently put, you really stress that you don't need to go too crazy over a certain weight, especially from stage. But I just know that if you want like some really good quality muscle, especially if you are looking at longevity in the sport, I'm sure like yes, it had a time and a place, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also like you can't set a number because everyone's a little bit different.
Mhm.
And you also need to look at the whole picture. Like at what point do you regain your menstrual cycle? Like, I think that's a huge point. It's like you can have this ideal of like, oh, I'm going to just keep myself within 20 pounds of stage weight. And it's like, yeah, but what if that's not a sustainable weight for you? Like, we think about weight gain and you wanting to gain muscle, but we don't think about being at a healthy weight to actually be strong and have hormones functioning optimally. So it's like you kind of got to give your body some wiggle room there.
Right, and I'm like realizing this now in my off season. I finally have diet down. It's very clean. I rarely get cheat meals myself. So and I'm okay with that mentally. I just know that it's like my body stores fat probably differently than other people, and I know that it might look like I have a lot in my legs, but that doesn't mean like that I went overboard. And I'm sure like, your body probably stores a certain fat and it's like, but I know my hormones are working and that is the important part because then everything else will start to work too. And I think like, hormones are such a huge like buzzword right now where I think a lot of people want coaches to help them with that, and then it's getting a little like some people know what they're doing and other people don't.
Yeah, it's my background is in nursing, and I just think like, oh my gosh, my professors or whoever, my coworkers would just be appalled knowing how much like bodybuilding coaches with no like actual medical background or anything are trying to like manage all these girls' hormones. Mostly girls. I mean, guys too. And I think girls have a lot more complications typically. And it's like, it's a little off-putting sometimes. And that's why I really like to, if possible, have someone like also have their doctor on board, because if you can be running it through them, not only is that helpful from a cost perspective of them like running labs through your insurance, but like you have that medical advice. Now, not every doctor is going to want to work with someone if they know they're taking stuff,
Mhm.
but I think that if you can try to do that, that's going to be the best bet.
I totally agree. And like you said, like not all doctors are kind of like cool like that. I know when I first saw mine, I was like, here's what it is. And I know what I'm doing, but I made it very clear that when I'm in an off season, I'm trying to fix everything. You know what I mean? So I must feel like you got to take it very seriously with your doctors and not be afraid to just kind of go in there and do a little research on your own. Just be like, hey, like I'm seeking help. Can you help me? This is what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing, but I'm looking out for my health too. So it can get kind of hairy, but that's great because I know that you're a coach. You're like, let me help you in this process. But you know, it's like at a football game or something when the EMT is always there. It's like if someone gets hurt, the coach isn't gonna just jump in and like save the day. Like the EMT people are there on standby. So it kind of works in that same relationship with you and your clients.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if you want to be a really top-notch athlete, whether or not you're pro yet or not, it's like I think it takes a team in a way. Like you need to be as involved and dedicated as your coach is. Your coach needs to be very involved and aware, and you need to have good communication. You also need people for tissue work. You also need your doctor on board. Like you have a responsibility to be coordinating in all these different areas if you want to be functioning at your highest level.
I'm so glad you brought that up about deep tissue and stuff too, because I know Jay Cutler talks about it all the time about how often he would get deep tissue leading up to the Olympia. And it's true, like obviously we would love to go more than I'm sure most of us can afford. But if you can make it a priority once a month or whatever, I mean, definitely in the off season and prep, it's an all year round thing. It's going to help that tissue and blood flow and everything else. So I'm so glad you bring that up because it's probably often kind of like work out hard, but then like, okay, there's still like a lot of a recovery process that goes a long way.
Yeah, and it's like the harder you're lifting, the harder you're working out, it's like the more you need that stuff. Like I added yoga in this off season and I'm like, man, it was a little bit humbling at first because I'm like, some of this is so hard for me right now, but I know that I need to maintain this mobility because I gotta be in some uncomfortable poses.
Yeah.
It won't be that long until that happens, and it'll be with more tissue than I've ever had before. So I need to maintain this as much as possible during this time.
That's awesome. So with yoga, do you make that like a daily priority? I know I've seen that you've posted like your routine, daily routine, and I'm sure you put yoga in there, but how much time are you spending with that?
Yeah, so really I do like 1 or 2 classes a week. I'm not doing anything daily. That would probably be great. It's more of a I think a time commitment, but it probably wouldn't be a bad thing to incorporate something like that as long as like the yoga is more stretching focused. Because some of them can be actually really challenging on the joints. Like if you're doing a lot of like chaturangas where you're doing these like slow eccentric push-ups, it's like I started feeling that in my shoulder a ton. I'm like, that's not going to be worth it to me to compromise my training the next day. So it's like if you're adding in activities outside of lifting, even if they're supplemental, like you need to think about how that's affecting your lifting and then kind of zone back into like, okay, what is the priority goal right now?
I'm glad you bring that up. That is seriously a good point because and I'm sure it's probably really good to do before a workout and get some like ligaments and stuff all warmed up before if you do a leg day or whatever. If you feel like you need like your hips and low back, because I work a desk job, so I get it, and I'm sure many other people do too, where you're just going to get stiff, and that will like go to your workout when you're going in the evening or whatever if you're not going in the morning or whatever, what have you, because and posing, you brought that up too. That is so huge because with all the twisting, I'm always trying to just like twist these people. And I'm like, you just got to stretch or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And One of my like fellow coaches, Alan, does a posing series on YouTube, and he talks about that, like the importance of mobility drills before you pose. And I never really thought about that before, but I now understand why it's necessary.
Absolutely, especially in prep when you're already really tight and depleted. Yeah, getting a little bit of like stretching out and stuff is just, it's gonna just be better if you keep consistent like anything else that we do in this sport, correct?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you made it back to stage in 2020, and I gotta ask now, since it was 2020, like, did you have any concerns during 2020? Like, how was that journey going into the show season?
It was weird for me. I picked a show, and I that show was not moved. It was not canceled. It was just like the weirdest thing for me because it was like everyone around me was experiencing all these shows just like falling apart, and I had like the one show that actually finally happened. Like every show before that had been canceled, and it was like I never had to change my plan. I never had to change my timeline, which I'm just so grateful for because I'm just so type A that I think if my show had gotten canceled, I probably just would have had a breakdown. But it was, for me, it was like the one thing I needed during that time. I didn't have a lot of, I mean, no one had a lot of stability really,
Mhm.
but I couldn't find a job. I was having a really, really hard time finding a job, and I was feeling very purposeless. And having prep as something to just put all my energy towards was just so helpful from a mental health standpoint for me.
Mhm. That's awesome that it kind of like played out the way it did for you in a positive way. Now, while you had stuff going on in the background, which I'm sure that comes down to a mindset, like prep kind of guided you through that time in your life, but I'm sure that was like your mindset, like this is like the best thing I can do for myself, and it just kind of carried you through.
Yeah, I just think I'm really goal oriented, and I know a lot of people are in general, but in this sport especially. And I think sometimes prep can be like the one thing that makes sense. It provides some structure when life feels really chaotic.
Mhm.
And it's not just about like, oh, I'm just going to get to the show. It's like, no, I'm going to make the most out of each week leading into it, because that's where you're learning so much about yourself and what you can like actually accomplish in a given time frame.
Mhm. Yeah, and to if anybody's wondering, I'm pretty sure that you have a vlog of that prep, right?
Hmm.
Okay, I remember watching it. I just don't remember all the details. So I'm like, okay, if anybody wants to see some of the footage from that, you definitely have your vlogs on your YouTube for that.
Yeah.
Because then I think it also showed you going in the nationals too.
Yeah. And it was, I'm glad I did it. I kind of go up and down with YouTube sometimes. I've taken some time off, but I'm so thankful for that because it's so cool to look back on that time and realize like, man, I was balancing. Once I got a job, I was working night shift and as a nurse, and it was during COVID, so it was just all like really chaotic, and I like wasn't sleeping, and it was just cool to look back on that process and like, wow, I did that. Like those times when I start to doubt, like, what am I doing right now? Like, am I making progress? Because off season can feel so like slow and stagnant. Like, I know that that prep went so well because I spent so much time in a dedicated off season leading into it. So I know that this phase is just as important as that prep phase was, and will just be just as important as the next prep is.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you say that. I hope everybody hears that loud and clear that a very good off season, that you have time, is just so beneficial. It really is, for especially us girls, like we talked about with hormones and stuff. Like, keep the ball rolling, because like when you're in prep, like that's prep time. You're gonna get to a certain point where it's like the work it's done, right? At that very end, like leading up to peak week or whatever, it's like you just want your body in total zen mode. Like, that's not building muscle time.
Right. And you're not building muscle during that time. So like I feel like the worst feeling, and this is gonna happen because I think body dysmorphia is just kind of like almost embedded in prep. You get leaner and leaner, and you feel smaller and smaller, and it's like, oh my gosh, I could have put on more muscle. But I like don't want to get to that point in this prep. Like So that's why what I go back to when I start to like get kind of down or frustrated or kind of worried about putting on so much size in off season is like, this will be whittled down and all of this will be revealed, but like now's the time to focus on building.
Yes, absolutely. And it's patience. I don't think many people have patience anymore either. And it's just so fast, and you see things on social media, and it's like, the pros that you look up to, they put in their time. And I'm seeing like that you've put in your time during these off seasons. So like it makes sense why you look the way you do. And like there's no like quick magic pill or anything like that. It's just a process.
Yeah. And I think social media is like, there's good and bad with it,
Mhm.
but comparison is never good. Like you can't look at a lot of the posts people are putting up, or a lot of the athletes are at the top levels. Like they'll be 18 competing looking like that. Like you'll know if you're genetically elite pretty early on, and otherwise you need to just know that it's going to take time, and you invest it because you love it, but don't do it out of comparison, because the stage will never satisfy you. You have to love the process. And if you're doing it out of comparison, you're always going to feel frustrated because there's always going to be someone better than you.
Oh, absolutely. And we talked about just showing up, because you can't predict who shows up. I mean, yes, when you're a pro and you see the lineup, okay, cool. But like as an amateur, like you just don't know. I mean, you could be doing a local show and somebody could have flew in from another state and just show up and be amazing. And it's just like, okay, like I came in and you were your best. And as long as you can be as happy as you can, it's great.
Yeah,
So, how was your national show experience?
it was fun.
Because it was your one and only, and I get that, because that's how it was for me too. I had
Yeah,
one, and it was like, oh, so like I don't have to do anymore. Okay, like
right. Yeah, exactly. Like, good. Let's just knock this out the first time around.
yeah,
I found that the weeks between the two shows, I had like 4 weeks between, I was really struggling. I was very, very, I don't know. I think just after the show, it was so high and exciting. And I just was so zoned into just the one show and not really, I didn't let myself think I would go to nationals or anything. I was just like, I have the show and I got to do my best. And I went and I won, and they're like, now you go to nationals. And I was like, wait, like I thought I was done now. But so then I was just feeling really worn out. Like the night shifts were starting to get to me. So by the time I got to nationals, I was just so ready to just do it, to knock it out. And honestly, like I felt like my physique was in a really good spot at that point. Like I feel like I knew what I was going to look like on stage. Like we had kind of figured out what worked for me in the peak week before. So it just felt a little bit more smooth. And I went out like a week before so I could kind of settle down in South Carolina and kind of, get my workouts in and not really worry about traveling too close to the show. And then show day was weird because it went so fast. Like my first show, I didn't go on for finals until after 11 p.m.
mhm.
And then nationals, it was like, I swear it all was over in like 30 minutes. I don't even know what happened, but they were like, okay, you guys got to be here. You got to be here. We were just like running around, and it was like raining out. So we're like running with stuff over our heads. And it was it was so fast. I barely remember being on stage, but it was cool because that was when I noticed the camaraderie, like people backstage, just like so excited to be sharing this experience and excited to be there.
Yeah. And then of course when you win the pro card, it's like, wow, like everybody is so like celebratory, because it's like that feeling is just, you can't replace it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was cool to kind of know some people. Like there were a couple people from my previous show there, and it was just cool to be able to like celebrate that with them and kind of go through the process with them. And part of that process had been just like messaging through quarantine, because that's how everyone was keeping up with each other. But then it was like, we made it, like through one of the hardest years, like we made it to this level. And that's like, regardless of our placing, like that is what is so exciting.
Absolutely. And you guys are in front of the best judges. So of course you can't let that get inside your head. But then at the same time, like how cool is it to know that like the judges picked you? Like the best judges were like, that's it. That's the pro.
Yeah, it's super humbling, and it's just like it just feeds the fire to like want to come back even better every time, because it's like, all right, it's like you get that high of the show, and then it's like, wow, now I'm at the bottom because now I'm a pro, but like I haven't. I mean, even now it's been a couple years, and it's like I haven't been up on that stage yet. So it's like I know I gotta earn it again. But for me, that's what's so motivating. It's like I I will always be striving towards my best, but like I never want to settle at the top. That's not really my mindset. So it's like I love that it's like, all right, now there's a new goal. The bar is set higher.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's exciting. It keeps, like you said, it keeps that fire going, and that you've been putting in this time. So it's like the carrot dangling. You're like, I know that it's going to be worth the wait, but when I get that carrot and get on that stage, it's going to be like, that's going to be a whole new experience and feeling.
Yeah.
And is there any show that you really want to do? Like, is there one where you're, like New York or something, that's something close to you that's like, that's the show I would love to be on that stage?
I've never really had like a desire for a particular show. My hometown is Indy, so maybe like one day Indy Pro would be cool. But looking at the timeline, I think next year we're kind of shooting for around Pittsburgh Pro, and that's more based on the time than the actual show. But I think eventually I'd love to do like an international show, but other than that, I hadn't really like set a particular one. It's more going to be based on like, all right, when's going to be the best timeline for me?
I agree, because like you talked about traveling and getting there ahead of time and you're comfortable before the show, and I would love to do international too. And I think you would have to get there early, so you kind of have to plan ahead, and then you're in a country that you might not know the language, you don't know. And of course, from what I heard, especially the European countries, they love female muscles. So I'm just like, imagine like going over there and having like a cool fan base or something.
Right. Yeah. It would just be such a cool experience, and to see like everyone's speaking the same language, like sharing this passion, even though the cultures are so different. And that's something that I would just love to experience.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, in this like off season, I know that you had the idea of physique for a hot minute, and I wanted to ask, like, because I think that's cool. I love physique, I love figure, but I like the physique goal, and I know that that just requires more muscle. You're in your off season, so how was that mindset or process of I want to do physique and then kind of shifting gears too?
Yeah. So I've always loved physique. I think it's beautiful. I think the posing is really cool. And just having a little bit more autonomy on the stage.
Mhm.
Also, kicking the heels would be nice. But that was, my goal. And I think it was maybe a little bit of stubbornness. I had been told a few times, like, hey, I just think figure would be better for you. Like, you're just, probably not going to have the size. And it just felt like well, maybe I could try it and show you. But I think I just needed to know that I could go after something because I wanted to, and then I could make the decision whether or not that was going to work. And it was fun. Like I spent, I had to grow regardless. So I got to dig right into off season. I was practicing physique posing and um, really enjoying that. And, the more I pushed in off season, the more I realized like, all right, like this is a lot slower than I thought. Like you always think a rebound's going to be like really fast. Um, but I just wasn't putting on the amount of tissue in the amount of time that I wanted. And that's where the patience comes in. But also just knowing like, all right, if I'm going to put on the amount of tissue I need to be competitive on a physique stage for myself, it will probably take quite a bit more gear in off season. And I started a cycle, and I like started noticing my voice changing again. And I was like, this is a deal breaker. Like, I don't want to experience any more viralization. And I already know I'm going to have to be on cycle during prep. So like if I'm having to run things this high, which wasn't even that high
Mhm.
compared to other people, um, if I'm having to run things this high and having issues in off season, by the time I get to the stage, like what kind of side effects am I going to be dealing with?
Right. And I think I'm sure you got that a lot because I even get it too. They'll be like, are you going to move up to physique? And I'm just, I'd be in your position where I'd be like, I would have to take a lot more than I'm probably comfortable with. And like, that's cool if those girls want to do it. And I know for me, like, I just finally like got off Accutane and I had a lot of acne and I don't know if it was the gear or what it could have been. But I know that like, I'm not risking that either because I'm probably more acne prone, which I hope that some girls realize that like you said about your voice changing and like there's all these like different side effects that can affect people differently. And you don't know until you try, right? So it's just like,
Yeah, and you don't know till it starts happening, and then it's like damage control. Like I did Accutane too. I've been through all that, and it's like, man, that sucks. And once you have to do that, it's just like I'm never doing that again. Um, but you don't know until it starts happening, and it is gradual. So like
mhm,
even if you're not necessarily feeling like you're experiencing a lot of sides, I think about like the cumulative load over time of being on androgens.
mhm,
You're going to have side effects, even if it's really slow. Like
mhm,
I didn't really know my voice was changing, but now that I like go back and watch my first YouTube videos, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's changed so much.
mhm.
But you have to kind of know like every cycle you do, you're going to be a little bit closer to those side effects. It's not just like I might or might not have them. I think about it like you have to think of it building up over time.
Right. It's like how much are you willing to risk? And like that's going to be different per person. And I mean, you end up being your own guinea pig. But like the side effects, a lot of them are going to be like you can't go back once you do it. And I just hope that people are knowledgeable to either do their own research or have a coach that knows what they're doing. There's all these variables. And I know for you, it sounds like you were working with someone and then went off of like, okay, we're going too far, let's cut it. And then you made your decisions from there.
Yeah. And man, just I wish I could encourage so many people to just dial in your nutrition and training. Like I have people come to me and they're like, a month or so in, they're like, okay, well, when can we start some Anavar? And it's like, dude, I haven't gotten one check-in where you followed your diet 100%. Like you're adding like drinks every other day. So why would we add that in? Like gear is an ACE card that you add in when you've reached what you can do with food and diet or food and training being dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
If those aren't dialed in, you're so shorting yourself by adding this in now. Like start with the big rocks, those building blocks, and then add that in if necessary. But you can make so much progress just by dialing in your diet. And I have met very few people who actually get that right.
Yeah, it's a super supplement for a reason, guys. Like, your vitamin C and D should probably be a little more like important than the gear, but it's like this like big exciting thing, I guess. Like, oh, let's see like what we can do with this. And like, yeah, it's great for recovery. Like who doesn't like that benefit? But I mean, and that's really hard too. I mean, you're a coach, so like these are your clients asking, but I'm sure it's hard if you ever get them in your DMs where it's like you're like, I don't know how much advice to give this person when they're asking about gear. And I'm always straight up like, this is all like food and sleep and uh, doing what I do in the gym too, because let's face it, I think nowadays too, there's a lack of intensity in training.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just all these things that you're like trying to like tiptoe around and
Yeah. And it's like, think about it. We talked about needing to be patient, but this is an investment and you need to do it in a stepwise process.
mhm,
Focus on the diet and training because once you add in the gear, like it's typically going to take a little bit more over time to get a response. So start as late as you can so
mhm.
that you have some room to build up. Like I started Anavar when I was like 19 or 20, and it was like, that sucks because I really could have just dialed in training at that point, gone so much harder in the gym, and then been able to start that later on and maybe not have accumulated the side effects that I have at this point.
Right. And I totally agree where see what you can do with training and diet alone, and then you can like add in some goodies. And it's like, if you behave, then let's
Yeah.
talk about it. But and
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like, I don't think I could ever be a coach just because it's like, I just want those people to nail, like, I don't need to babysit. Like, I need you to do the food and the water and, like, take care of yourself. And then we can see what we can do to play around, especially when some of these people might not even, like, they just want to do one show and be done. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
why even add any gear?
Right, exactly. And like I think people don't think about that. Like you can really get pretty far in a prep without using a lot of anything at all. My first show I didn't use anything, which whether or not that would have helped, probably not, because I didn't have everything dialed in. But really, you want to limit things and only use what you have to use. It's not like you have like this plan mapped out throughout the entire prep of like, okay, here's all the gear I'm going to be using. It's like, no, like a lot of things you pull in as needed if you have to get that little boost.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I totally agree. And some gear will make you hold water weight too. So it's like you got to be careful with what you use, especially close to a show, and what you're pulling out. I mean, again, it's the variables and you want to stay consistent. So anything that, you should try some things out in your off season too. And this is for, I feel like, competitors who are a little seasoned at this point, like, see what you can do in an off season and how it affects you. Don't be just throwing in random shit during prep.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good point. I think that's the time to figure that out. And if you work with a coach, like be really honest about what you're taking, because like I found out later people added in other stuff and I'm like, that's why your labs were all messed up. But it's like you have to communicate. Like if you have a coach, I think it's so important. And if there's something that you're wanting to do, like make it a conversation and then understand why or why not it's time to add in something.
Right. And let's be honest, if your coach isn't willing to talk about these things with you, or you don't feel comfortable talking about these things with them, like, that should be a red flag too.
Yeah, definitely. I worked with a coach and I asked what we might be using and in prep, and I got it depends. And I was just like, what does that mean? And I couldn't have a conversation with him about what we were going to be taking because he was just like tiptoeing around it. And I think he was trying to like cover his own butt a little bit. And I'm like, I'm going to need a lot more open communication about this because I have a coach to give me guidance in these areas. And if he had said no on something, it's not like I would have fought back. It was just like, I need to have a conversation that allows me to ask questions and understand why or why not we're using things, because ultimately it's something that's going to affect your body and potentially like your health markers. So you should understand the implications.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good takeaway there, guys. Communicate with your coach, be comfortable with your coach. And if these like things come up that you're questioning, like, think about who you're with and what it's going to do to you long term, because a lot of the, like, they say that this sport isn't healthy, and it can get to that point if you don't take care of yourself. And I mean, you're paying for a coach, you're paying for a service, so don't be paying for someone to maybe damage you. Like, that's kind of scary.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got your pro card and it was fantastic and wonderful. You went through the off season and you went almost to physique and then pulled out, which is like cool because like you said, the posing is fun. So it's kind of cool that you got to kind of practice a little bit and do something different. Now, let me ask you this. What's your thoughts on, like, have you heard people talk about how like figure and physique are kind of looking the same now?
Yeah. That was a conversation I kind of had with my coach when I told him, kind of second guessing physique now. I just feel like it's going to take a lot. I don't know if I'm wanting to do a 2 or 3 year off season.
Mhm.
And, he said, really look at these girls, their figures getting big. And I know size will never be my strength.
Mhm.
So I don't know. It's really interesting to see how the classes have changed. And I think that we kind of go through these phases. It's, why they pulled out women's bodybuilding and then put it back in. It's like they're trying to control these things, but I think the sport just fluctuates a lot in terms of the development expected for each class.
Right. Yeah. And I've told people that too. It just depends on who shows up. There could be a girl that comes in that's like super shredded but big, and your eyes just go right to her. Like, you look at Sydney, and when she's in her lineup, like, she's got such a tiny waist, your eyes just go right to it. And I think that's kind of what will happen with judges. It's just how can you deny where your eye goes right away?
Yeah. And the thing about her is she's not huge,
Oh,
right? But she has the frame that's so perfect that they've been looking for. So it's like, I also think it's like that goes back to the comparison thing. Yes, it's getting bigger because I think like a lot of people to keep those proportions need the size to keep the small waist. But also look at what's winning the show. You know, it's not the biggest girl on the stage, but it's having the stage presence, it's having the shape still, not being super striated. So I think just keeping an eye on the whole sport and also thinking in the end it's about bringing your best. You
mhm.
can't be looking at people's physiques and be like, okay, well, I'm going to do my physique more like this or more like this. It's like you need to focus on your process and being the best you can be. And then you're going to see how you show up.
Right. Yes. Being patient, working on yourself. Now, like, yeah, it's great to look at the pros and everything too, but like you said, it's a shape that's maintained. And like you said too, Sydney's not a big girl. Like I think she's like 5'3" or 5'4". And are you around that height too?
Mm-hmm. Five,
Okay, yeah,
four.
me too. And I think that's just like a really good height for figure, to be honest. Like it's just like a nice even look. And yeah, I totally agree with you though. You just have to put on the muscle, but maintain a shape because that's going to be what figure is, like that even top and bottom half that's symmetrical. And
Yeah,
because some girls just know how to pose big.
that is huge. And I think that's something that um, I'm definitely guilty of not always practicing in off season for sure. But I think it's so important. And it just is so frustrating to see someone show up with a really nice physique and then they get on stage and they like cannot move their bodies at all. And it makes a massive difference.
Oh yeah, confidence. I mean, again, comparison in social media is really affecting people mentally, because I even see some girls that have the physique like you're talking about, that they just don't have that stage presence or confidence. Like I'll see a girl, she looks amazing, and then I see her walk, and it's just like, girl, like pick your chest up, walk out, act like you own that stage. And some people are just like, I don't know how to think that way. I just don't think, like I just work in the gym, and this like stage thing's just a whole new like skill set.
Yeah, and it is, but it is a whole new skill set, and that's why I think it takes practice. It takes working with a posing coach. I'm definitely not natural in my body. Like I don't move very eloquently at all, so it takes a lot. But you have to be practicing that stuff. You can't expect to just show up on stage and like we'll see the work that I put in the gym. It's like no, because this sport as a female requires like a lot of grace on stage and that stage presence makes a massive difference. And you have to make that as important in your process for preparation as any other part of the process.
Absolutely. Like those judges, like that's why I say you go up there and you own the stage. You look at those judges and be like, nobody else but me right now. Your eyes are on me. And how are you going to do that? You got to like add a little sass and sparkle where you got to be a girl up there. I'm, I don't want to be sexist of any sort, but that's kind of how it can be sometimes with bodybuilding is adding a little bit of pageantry to this.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So I'm excited. You're, thinking about the Pittsburgh Pro, and we'll see what happens. Like you said, I'm the same way. Just see it closer to time, but probably a spring show sounds about right. Just start the season off, and then, always can hope for that O qualification, right? And that can be at the end
Yeah.
of the year. Are you going to the Arnold or the O this year?
I'm not going to the Arnold, but I will probably go to the O. It's always really fun. What
Right.
about you?
Yeah, I'll be going to both, so I'll be around.
Sweet.
And then, because you're on the East Coast like me, right? Are you still in North Carolina?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. How's the bodybuilding scene there?
it's small
Well,
compared to like I came from Dallas, so Dallas had like a really big bodybuilding community. Here
mhm.
it's a lot smaller, but it's been kind of cool to be in an environment where there's not as many bodybuilders and you can kind of, get like I'm in a gym that it's a Gold's gym. So it's just like mixed with lifestyle and a couple of people who compete and different goals. And it's kind of fun to be in that environment again, because that's where I like came up. That's like where I always trained. And it's just a lot easier to stay focused on your process when you're not distracted fight a lot of other bodybuilders around.
That's true too. It can be motivating, but then it can also get like in your head sometimes, especially on the days that
Yeah.
you're not feeling it. Because then you're gonna go in there and just be like, I ain't like these guys. I should just quit. But it's like, no, just get in the zone. That's why I think it's funny too that I just want to point out, like sometimes I'll go to a Planet Fitness just because like I have one really close to me and it's whatever. But I go in there and I feel like, hey, like they don't mind me there, so I'm just gonna walk around and like act like the cool kid for a while. But then I'll go to my bodybuilding gym and then it'll be okay. Then I'm just like humbled out.
Yeah, it's a good balance. You got to have that. My training partner is a pro classic physique competitor, so I'm like, I get that. I'm like, I'm never gonna be as strong as you were, like unloading all the plates so that I can lift. But then I get to kind of feel like I know what I'm doing in the gym because I'm like not around all the bodybuilders, so it's a good balance.
I love that. And then since you're a coach, are you doing just online only? Do you do personal training? How's that work for you?
I do online only. In Dallas, I did a little personal training, but I really like the online just because I feel like I can focus on advising with the diet too, which is really what I love doing.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Are you taking on clients? So I would assume you do prep and lifestyle.
Yeah, I am right now.
Awesome. And they can just like, how do you like that preferred? Is that like through Instagram or you have a coaching consult website?
Yeah, so in my bio on Instagram, and I have a link in there, and there's a link for Calendly. That's my coaching consult. So if you are interested, you can book a free consult, and I'll just kind of hear out your goals and walk you through the coaching process and stuff.
Perfect. And do you still work as a nurse or anything like that? Or is it just full-time
I
coach?
don't,
Okay.
just full-time coaching. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool to hear because I'm sure like, was that scary to make that jump?
Yeah, that was right after nationals, like the week after I made that decision. And it was scary and it's been up and down. There's times when I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have left. But, just over time, realizing how passionate I am about this in comparison to how I felt about nursing, I'm like,
Mhm.
I can put so much more work into this because I love it
Mhm.
that I'm willing to put in the time that it takes to build this, just like I was with bodybuilding. It's like when you love what you're doing, it doesn't feel like you can't let that fear rule you because you're just so invested in the process.
Absolutely. And like you'll make it happen, right? When you put yourself in those uncomfortable positions, you will make it work. Like you got to work to make your money, right? So,
Yeah.
and
Sean
bodybuilding,
Clarita is like, no plan B. And I'm like, yeah, like there's times like that where you put yourself in situations where you're like, man, there's no backup plan. So I better freaking work.
God, I love Sean. His mindset's just fantastic too, and just so humble. And those are the people. Those are like the real deal people to look up to in this sport. The ones that put their time in. They're humble and they give out information, which I do want to thank you because I know you've got a great YouTube channel, which I hope everybody goes and follows. Which I think all of your links are in your Instagram
Mm-hmm.
profile. So old soul made new, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you give out free information as a coach, and I think that's great that you give to get back.
Yeah. I mean, I learned what I knew to start through YouTube and Instagram, and that's the only place I knew to look. And so to me, it's just like, I love sharing this. I think that there's so much value in finding a plan that you enjoy, even if your goal isn't the stage. It's like, it's changed my life to have some fitness goal um, at the forefront of my mind at most stages in my life. And it's helped me through a lot of difficult times. And I just think like there's so much value in it and you can learn so much about yourself. And I don't know, it's just life changing. So I just love sharing that stuff because I think that there's so much value beyond the stage.
There definitely is. It's just like because I know that you have a partner at home, and you've got your coaching and your clients, and like the stage is just that little percentage, and like you love to train and everything else. So I'm sure you've probably preached this yourself, but you always got to know your why, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah. And you need to clarify that. And I think that's really important. And I think if you want to compete, like understand why you do. And it can be just to fill it out. I get that. That was my first goal too. But if it's just to fill it out, then you understand that the risks of some of the decisions you might make through that process, you need to decide if they're going to be worth it based on that why. So it's like solidifying that to start with can help you clarify a lot of the decisions along the way.
Yes, definitely. So thank you for being open about your journey, because like I'm the same way. I love to share because people need it nowadays, like we keep talking about communication and like we're just using social media to communicate, right?
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you want to say for the ending of this? I mean, I know you're with HD Muscle also, and then you've been with Gasp for as long as I think I've known you. So
Yeah. So you can always, all of that's in my Instagram, so you can definitely feel free. If you have questions or anything, like you can reach out to me there. I'm like always in my DMs, so happy to answer anything. And if there's anything that you want to see on YouTube and stuff like that, I'm always open to that as well, because I just love putting this stuff out there. So I really appreciate you having me. I love just like talking to other people who are super passionate about this too.
me too. Thanks I mean, I know we don't really know each other too well, but this is why I love the podcast, because it's almost like I don't know where I'd be able to meet you until so it's like,
Yeah.
here's my virtual handshake. Let me get to know.
Yeah. I
So
love
thank you
that.
so much for coming on, and I look forward to your journey. I'll be watching, and maybe I'll do the Pittsburgh too. I don't know, but
Heck
we'll make
yes.
the backstage so much
Yes.
fun. All right,
I'd love
sweetheart. Thank
that.
you so much, Olivia, and I'll be sure to put this up soon. So thank you.
Awesome.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.